Okay.
Hi.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program tonight about priorities and prayer in lockdown. And maybe a little personal story by way of introduction. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about some of the theory and some of the practice. So a story to just to get us in the mood. Recently, I've been wondering whether there is a well locally that I might be able to use to put my children in a bucket and slowly lower them down. Maybe not forever, just for some time, just a little bit of time. You see, it would be lovely to have some noiseless moments, maybe some uninterrupted headspace during lockdown. Wouldn't it be great to be able to just to daven, to learn, to make some community phone calls without constant interruption? Wouldn't it be great if there was just a well that we could put them in for a little bit, just for a little bit? They'd be fine. They'd be fine. Ezra's favorite pastime at the moment is to plop himself into a flower pot in the garden. He sits in the dirt and just feels the dirt, plays with the dirt. So I'm sure a bucket in the well would be fine for him too. And when I had this thought, I realized after a little bit of thinking, maybe quite a bit of thinking, but I realized how wrong I was. You see, we all have expectations about what life should be like. We all have expectations about, for example, what prayer should look like, how connecting to God normally is manifest. For some of us, that means that prayer is going to shul, having a minyan, having people that we know around us, having a rabbi at the front of the shul, a rebbetzin in the ladies section, people that we can use as sort of role models for our prayer. We all have expectations about what that looks like, and when those expectations aren't met, so then it can feel like our attempts to come close to God are being stifled, are being hampered by the situation. I'm standing here in my house, I'm trying to daven, and all I have is a little boy pulling on the cords of my tefillin, so it's kind of moving further and further off my head. But of course, what went wrong in my head, what went wrong in my calculation was that Hashem put me in this situation. He didn't put me in shul. Hashem decided that I was going to have this beautiful child to pull my tefillin off my head. He didn't leave them on in peace. He wanted them to be rocking around. Hashem gave me children in this home, gave me disturbances in this place. He didn't build a well. And so I need to recognize that Hashem's right here, right in this moment. And I suppose the first thing that I want to share is this idea, which is present in many different sources, but I've read it particularly in the works of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, that we may have imagined, we may have fantasized about how our service of Hashem will look like. But when we wake up to the actual situation we're in, we have to realize that's where Hashem wants us to be. Hashem wants me to be here, right now, in my home, not in a shul, davening to him without a role model, without structure, without the normal container that tefillah, that davening sits in. He wants me to be here, and he wants my davening. There's a verse in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, And the verse in English reads approximately, "My dove, in the cleft of the rocks, show me how beautiful you are, because you are so beautiful." There's this image of a dove being stuffed into the cleft of the rocks, unable to come out and show its beauty. And God calls upon the dove and says, I just want to see you. I just want to hold you. There's a real longing, a yearning in this verse. Hashmi'eni es kolech. Let me hear your voice. And there's a medrash in Medrash Rabbah, in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, which goes alongside this verse. And the medrash tells the story of a king. All midrashim like to use the metaphor of a king, but there's a king, and he has invited his estranged daughter to come and visit him at the arena. Now there seems to be some sort of rift between the king and his daughter. Otherwise, why is he inviting her to the arena? And the king has invited her, but he's also organized for something a little bit strange to occur. That when her party arrives to the arena, they're going to be pelted with rocks, so that she will call out, Abba, Abba, Hatzileni, Father, Father, save me. The king says, I just wanted to hear you call out to me. Just wanted to hear your voice. Hashmi'eni es kolech. Let me hear you. And the medrash continues that in Egypt, when we were slaves, we were becoming so numb and so desensitized to what it meant to have a relationship with Hashem, that more difficulty had to occur before finally we cried out. Finally we called out and we remembered, Abba, Abba, Hatzileni, Father, Father, save me. And this gives an amazing insight into times of distress, times of national distress, times of worldwide distress. That often we can think about these times as punishments from God. And this actually transforms that understanding to think of this as an opportunity. He just wants to hear our voices. He just wants us to cry out. This is a zman of tefillah. This is a time of prayer. A time where the whole world is suffering, where thousands of people are vulnerable, are sick, are on ventilators, and are dying. And he just wants to hear us call out, not to see this as a punishment, but to see this as an invitation. Please, please speak to me. Remember that I'm here, that I love you. Remember, I want you to call out to me. So we're davening at home. And we're going to talk both about formal davening, the 3 set services of the day, Shacharit, the morning service, Mincha, the afternoon service, Ma'ariv, the evening service. But we'll also speak about informal prayer, times where we might just be moved to speak to Hashem, just to talk. In actual fact, if we want to talk about what the biblical requirement for prayer is, according to Nachmanides at least, that is it. To call out in times of distress from one's heart and to say, Hashem, help me. Everything else is of rabbinic origin, according to Nachmanides. But that's the real essence of prayer. So let's begin when we are praying, particularly when we are praying a formal prayer, meaning a Shacharit, Mincha, or Ma'ariv service. Let's talk about place and let's talk about time. And let's talk about dress. Now, a lot of these things that I'm sharing with you are standard halachot of prayer, because the laws of prayer are there to help us achieve a certain sense of structure and a certain mindset when it comes to prayer. So in terms of place, In general, we seek out to have a fixed place for prayer, a fixed place often in shul, or a fixed place in our homes. And there are all sorts of sensitivities when it comes to place. But when it comes, for example, in shul, if a person has a fixed place, there's a lot of respect given to that, a lot of concern that people should have their fixed place. When we're at home, we should also have a fixed place. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. There's so much of practical and so much of spiritual. The practical side of it is that if one has a place that is free from distraction, that is appropriately, in appropriate surroundings, you don't want to be in your bedroom. You want to be in a place that is set aside, that is orderly, that is clean. It's a place that is going to then have a conducive, or offer a space that is conducive to having a mindset of connection, of serenity, of being able to speak to Hashem. But also there's a certain spiritual idea, which is that a person can find their daled amot, their daled amos, their kind of the space which is particularly connected to them. And for this, anyone who's looked through some of the tractate Brachot, Masechet Brachot, that we did in Daf Yomi just a few months ago. So there you'll see that there is a real sensitivity to finding a place that also one learns in. So some of the great Rabbanim didn't daven in shul, they davened in the study house. In those days, they were two separate places. Nowadays, often they occupy the same space. But in those days, so they would daven in the place that they were learning, because it's almost like the place that you occupy when you learn and when you pray. This is a place where you start to, the way I think about it, you start to chisel away a connection to the throne of glory. You start to chisel away your own sort of tunnel into a higher spiritual realm, and that is almost like, in Star Trek there were transporter beams. So this is your and in order to get transported, so you had to go onto the pad, right? So whoever it was standing in the control room, and then you go onto your pad, and that pad would transport you somewhere else. So that's kind of how I think about it a little bit when it's coming to, now I'm giving away that I'm a closet Trekkie, or at least used to be. So you're standing on your transporter pad, and this is the place that you've been practicing beaming up all those every single day, 3 times a day. And you've not just been practicing beaming up through prayer, but you've been practicing beaming up through learning and through engaging with Zoom shiurim and all the different things that one does at home. So let's say you've got a study at home, a place that you study Torah, and a place that is set aside and is quiet and peaceful. So that could be a really nice place to kind of create your own transporter pad, whereby it's constantly being upgraded every time you use it. And that means that you can transport yourself further and further into places of spirituality and connection. It's also quite a psychological idea, just in terms even of memory. We often remember things better in the place that we learnt them. So if you ever want a tip to how to pass an exam, it's try and study for the exam in the hall that you're going to be taking the exam. Now that's not often necessarily so possible, but it is something whereby when you do something in the same place, your brain gets locked into those surroundings, and so you could more easily create the same mindset that you want. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I walk into shul, if it's a shul that is a place that I have associated with serenity, with focus, so then that's going to help me tap into what prayer is all about. It can also work the other way, because if shul has become a social club, then I'm not necessarily going to be focused at all. But that's a separate discussion. Okay, so the first thing's about place. Finding that place and reusing that place. And that should be your makom kavua, your fixed place for prayer and for study. The next thing is about timing of shacharit, mincha, and mariv. And so here we'll talk about ideals, and then we'll talk about the wiggle room within timing of the day. When it comes to shacharit, there is a clear time that is brought down in halacha as the ideal time to pray, so much so that there is a tension within halacha that if a person has a fixed custom to pray at this time, even if there's only 1 minyan in town and that minyan in town is at a different time, so then if that fixed custom will often override, and that fixed custom to pray at this time will override the requirement to pray with a minyan. Okay, so what's this amazing time? That time is dawn. So that if we can time our shacharit prayer such that we're saying the Shmona Esrei, we're saying the Amidah, the standing silent prayer, as dawn breaks, that is the ideal time to pray. Ad kadei kach, so much so that if we were to have a minyan functioning in Eversley Road, and we also had the custom, or we had a pre-existing custom to pray at dawn, it could be that it's better to pray at dawn rather than to go to Eversley Road. So that's an interesting thing to recognize how important it is. Now, dawn at the moment, at least today, was approximately 20 to 6 in the morning. Some of us see that every day because we either wake ourselves up or are woken up at 5 a.m. But I recognize that 5:40 a.m., which actually means, now that's the Amida, so that would probably mean starting at about 5:20 to get to the Amida in time for 5:40. Now that's the ideal. That's the ideal, and that's davening at Nates. That's called Oravasikin Minyan. If that's not possible, so then we do have all the way until 10:30 a.m. as the latest time, approximately 10:30 a.m. today, as the latest time within which Shacharis should ideally be said, which is called Sof Zman Tfilah, which is the end of the time for davening. And if you even miss that, so then you've even got all the way till midday, which today fell out just before 1 p.m. So that does give a lot of wiggle room. Nevertheless, there's one other sensitivity, which is that even though the ideal last time for prayer today was approximately 10:30, there is still a time by which the Shema should be said. And today that either fell out at approximately 9:20 or 8:20. So if we're going to be praying, then we should be trying to get Shema in at the right time. That would be, and by the way, to get all these times, you can look on an amazing website called myzmanim.com. I'm going to put that in the chat so that you can all see how that's spelled. So that's myzmanim.com, and you can put in Barnet and it will give you all the times for Barnet. So you want to have Shema done by Sof Zman Kriyas Shema, by the end of the time for Kriyas Shema, for saying the Shema, and then to pray afterwards, if or just to put that within the time that you're going to be praying. Okay, so that's the timings for Shacharit. What about the timings for Mincha? So Mincha has to be said before Shkia, before sunset, and it can only be begun after Plag HaMincha, after Mincha Gedola. So today that would give you a window of opportunity from approximately 1:35 p.m. all the way through till sunset, which is just right now at about 8:18 p.m. So there's a lot of time there. Mariv. Now, Mariv is an interesting one. Normally we are lenient when we have a minyan to be able to say Mincha and Mariv together, even if Mariv is going to be quite early, even if Mariv is going to be before Shkia. But that leniency does not really apply when we're davening alone. And therefore, Mariv should be said after Shkia, and ideally also a little bit later too. But if you're davening Mincha before Shkia and davening Mariv after Shkia, that's fine. So let's say you wanted to do the two at the same time. So for example, today that Shkia is at 8:18, you might begin Mincha at 8, finish by 8:18, and then begin Mariv afterwards, after Shkia. And so then you straddle Shkia in the middle with Mincha on one side and Mariv on the other. Okay, so that's timing. And Mariv, you have the whole night to say Mariv all the way through till dawn. So once again, there's a good window of opportunity to say that. And don't forget that today was which day of the Omer? The 18th. Don't forget that the Omer should be counted after nightfall and with a bracha at night. And if you forget and count it in the morning, so then you count it without a bracha in the morning, but you can continue counting with a bracha if you have said it, if you've remembered it the next night. So that's talking about the formal times for prayer. But in terms of informal prayer, just calling out to God like we spoke about at the beginning, that can be done at any time. You log on to the BBC and you see another statistic that is just mind-blowing, overwhelming. You speak to a friend. I've got a friend who's a registrar in the Royal Free Intensive Care Unit. Well, after I speak to him, I have to daven. There's nothing I can do other than daven after I speak to him, because he's painting me a picture of what's going on out there that is too much to bear without calling out to Hashem and saying, please help us, help us, help us. You can't listen to these stories without being brought to speak to Hashem and just to ask. After I come off the phone to members of the community and hearing their distress, you cannot daven for people that you know are in distress. You can't hear these stories without wanting to say, please Hashem, you've got to help us now. Help him, help her, help this family. And so that can be done at any time. Any time you want to speak, he's there. He's waiting. Hashmi'eni ez kolech. Just let me hear your voice. How should we be dressed when we're davening? This is quite tricky because at home, it's often that we might not necessarily be dressed as we would when we go to shul. I don't go to shul in my pajamas normally. But I do walk around my house in my pajamas sometimes. At the same time, when we're speaking to God, we recognize, at least for the formal audiences with God, that is a meeting with the king. And whether I'm meeting with the king in shul or I'm meeting with the king in that set place I put aside in my home, that meeting should be done with a certain dignity. And I wouldn't necessarily say formality, because I'm not so into the kind of the stiff sort of British approach necessarily, but I'm more into the idea that we take it seriously. This is the creator of the universe. This is infinity. Yes, he loves us, but it's a big deal. And so if possible, one should be dressed differently for davening or at least should be dressed appropriately for davening. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to wear a suit. But it does mean that you should be dressed in a manner which is befitting of an audience with Hashem. Despite saying that, if I'm in my pajamas and I hear something or I just feel like talking to Hashem, I'm not going to rush into a suit to speak to him. I don't think that's how it works. When you love someone, you talk to them however you're dressed. And so when it comes to informal prayer, I think that level of dress and focus isn't necessary. It's coming automatically. It's a pouring out of my heart and my soul, and that can be done in whatever I'm wearing. Okay. So, in terms of time, further things about time. At shul, we are somewhat bound to follow the speed of the service. We're bound by whoever's leading. I know in Barnet sometimes we go quite slowly on a weekday morning, but I think that there is a certain option to be more flexible with our davening at home. And what I mean by that is, when we're around other people, sometimes we can feel inhibited in our davening. I know that probably the one time that I'm not inhibited when I'm in shul is on Purim, for obvious reasons. But otherwise, it can feel a little bit stifling to be trying to have deep emotional, spiritual expansive consciousness experiences while surrounded by a whole load of other people. I mean, just also speaking from a personal perspective, when I'm standing at the front of the shul and people are sometimes waiting for me to finish my davening in order to begin the repetition of the Amida. Now, I have told the wardens that I'm happy, I would like them to be able to start without me, but I know that there's sometimes that tension. So part of my mind is trying to speak to God, but part of my mind is also noticing that the murmuring at the back is getting louder and louder as they're waiting and waiting, and I feel like I have to rush. So also in shul, it might be strange for the rabbi at the front of the shul, for example, or anyone, to kind of to hold out one's hands, to lift up one's head, to dance, to sing, just or to really get into the davening in a way that is all-encompassing. There's an inhibition by being around other people. But when you're alone in your study or your set place at home, those inhibitions don't have to be there. Why not choose a different piece of Pasukei de Zimra each day and just decide that you're going to say every word with full thinking, translating each word very carefully at a time, using maybe an interlinear siddur, or just using the translation on the side and working it through step by step, taking a couple of minutes, 4 or 5 minutes on a small paragraph every day, choosing a different paragraph and deciding that that's the one to focus on for that day. We don't necessarily get these opportunities when we have to follow a set time schedule with a chazan in shul, but we can take these opportunities at home. The Gemara actually recalls how uninhibited certain sages were in their davening. So in Maseches Brachos again, which is again, that's the tractate about davening. So it talks about Rabbi Akiva, who would start davening in one corner of the room, and it would end up in the other corner of the room by the end of it, because he was so busy bowing and swaying and moving that he wouldn't be able to keep his feet in one place on the floor. Wouldn't it be nice to be so excited about davening? In our house, we do a musical Hallel, and we've had quite a few opportunities for Hallel with Pesach and Rosh Chodesh, and now it's quite beautiful actually. But when we start singing, the little boy, he starts running around in circles. He just gets so excited that we're all dancing with Hallel, and we're singing and we're clapping, and we dance in circles around the kitchen and around the front of the house, and we put the kids on our shoulders, and we're getting into it. It takes a long time for Hallel, but we would never do that. We don't do this at any other time, but this is an opportunity to feel something about davening, to really feel something. And maybe I could just leave you with a question about this part, which is, when was the last time I really felt davening? And for many of us, I think, okay, I'm going to project, but for many of us, we don't necessarily get to feel very much very often. And so with a little bit of an uninhibited approach, maybe we can start to connect to that heart. And once again, Hashem can hear our voice. If you're rushed for time, so there are priorities in prayer. I think we're getting on for a little bit long. So what I'll just say is that those can be found either at the back of an art scroll siddur. There's a very clear guidelines for, if you're rushed, what to prioritize and what to necessarily, what could be left out. And just a couple more things. A few people asked me what psalms to say if they wanted to add psalms for this current situation. There's a really good guide for different psalms at different times in the back of the green siddur. Personal go-tos for times of distress for me are Psalm 120. Psalm 121. 121. That's Esa'inai. And Psalm 130. Mama Kim Karasicha Hashem from the Dead 23. But what I've also recommended what I've also recommended to other people is that being quite close to Breslov Hasidus, so Rav Nachman of Breslov created something called the Tikkun HaKlali, which is Tikkun HaKlali literally means the overarching or the general tikkun, rectification or remedy. And he, as a highly spiritually sensitive individual, went through the whole book of Psalms and found 10 Psalms that somehow span, if we want to call it the spiritual scale. If you imagine that there's a scale of music, so he found 10 Psalms which cover the whole scale, which resonate with the whole breadth of the spiritual world. And so he specified that if one says these 10 Psalms, so then that creates a rectification, a remedy, which is all encompassing, which is overarching. And so I'll just put in the chat what to look up. So if you look up Tikkun HaKlali online, so then that will give you 10 Psalms, which are very, very powerful to say together. And they're very beautiful too. So that is also something that might be something to say. I personally like to say those on Shabbos after Musaf, but they can be said at any time. Also, just for the record, Rav Nachman also promised that if anyone goes to his grave in the Ukraine and gives a coin to tzedakah and says Tikkun HaKlali, he'll pull even the most degenerate individual out of hell by their payas. So it's an interesting thing that he promised. I actually went to Uman a little while ago, a few weeks ago, before lockdown, just a month or two before lockdown, and had the merit to say Tikkun HaKlali a number of times by his grave. So the payas are quite short at the moment, but if he can pull me out, then that'd be great. And the final thought before I open to questions is that really we should feel Hashem is very, very close. Hashem is right with us when we're washing up, when we're brushing our teeth, when we're preparing dinner. He's very close. He's right here. And I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is to use those times, those silent times, to begin small conversations, even just relating how the day was, just talking through what's been on my mind, but actually speaking. I can see Paul Lang is over there. I know Paul likes speaking to Floppy. So if we can replace Floppy with Hashem, it'd be even better. Is Floppy there on the couch next to you? There you go. Okay. So that is something that we can all do, and particularly we can bookend our day with the speaking to Hashem, because when we wake up, the first thing we say can be Moda ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam shehechazata bi nishmati b'chemla rava emunasecha. I thank you, Hashem. Thank you for bringing my soul back. We can begin the day with Hashem, and we can finish the day as we lie down to sleep and we wearily rest our heads on our pillows. We can finish the day with Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, a statement of faith and trust that as we go to sleep and we give our souls back to Hashem, that He'll look after them, He'll take care of them, and He'll put them back into our bodies to be refreshed for another day. So thank you for logging in tonight, and I'm going to open up the floor to any questions. If you'd like to ask a question, just unmute yourself and we'll take it in turns for any thoughts or comments, reflections and questions.
Rabbi, would you like to comment on, if you happen to forget to daven at a certain time, what can you do to make it up?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. So there is a way to catch up, so to speak, a prayer that's been missed out. And it depends why it's been missed out. If it's been missed out because I've been negligent, so then unfortunately it's gone and I have to bear the responsibility for that. But if it's simply because I was so tired that I just fell asleep, That's maybe slightly debatable, but there are good reasons. Maybe there are good reasons why I simply couldn't daven. So then I can at the next time that I'm praying, daven twice. So I would say the I would say the Amida twice at that time. It's called tashlumin. It's called repayment. And so that's what I would do with that. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I was unavoidably detained at the hospital or at a levaya. I was in the middle of doing a mitzvah, and the time for mincha just passed. I was busy the whole time. I was with the person who was bereaved, and I was totally taken up with that. So then I had no ability to extricate myself from the situation. It would have been inappropriate to extricate myself from the situation. So then when I daven Mariv, I daven two amidas, one after the other. One for the mincha that I missed, and the second one for Mariv that I'm davening at that time.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So when I'm davening, I sometimes, rather than just read the words, I'm kind of thinking about the ideas, almost meditating on the ideas. Does that count as davening, though?
That's a great question, and this is something that I often notice actually when it comes to davening, which is that often people will be looking in the siddur and reading the text, but reading it in their head and not saying it. So davening does need to be verbalized. And this actually, Paul, brings me on to something that I had wanted to say but didn't get a chance to say. So this is great, which is that davening does need to be spoken. It can't be left in one's head. You can meditate on a word and say the word and then say the word, or you can say the word and then meditate on it. That's fine, but the word needs to be said. And there are all different reasons for that, but essentially it's about taking a internalized state and it's about then manifesting it in reality, in physical expression, and that can only be done through speech.
But what about, sorry, you like the beginning prayers in Pesukei de Zimra, if you kind of say those notions as opposed to reading the exact prayer,
yeah,
does that count?
It counts as having tapped into Pesukei de Zimra, but it doesn't count as having said Pesukei de Zimra.
Okay.
What about the? Well, sorry.
But what you could do, Paul, is that I would say that if let's say you're going to spend 10 minutes on Pesukei de Zimra, and that's the time you've allotted to it, I would say it's probably a better use of time to get into that mindset that you're talking about, and then say there are parts of Pesukei de Zimra that have to be said. So you have to say Baruch She'amar, Ashrei, and Yishtabach as a bare minimum. But let's say that you're going to spend 5 minutes on Ashrei whilst meditating on those thoughts that you're talking about, and even if that means excluding some of the other parts of Pesukei de Zimra, I would say that's a better way to do Pesukei de Zimra than to just rush through all the text, not have any thinking at all, and not have any connection to the words themselves. What I would then say is, okay, so we've done that with Ashrei, so now let's do that with one of the Halalukas, and let's spend a week meditating on one of those Halalukas and spending 5 minutes on that. And now I can actually incorporate that already into what I'm doing for Pesukei de Zimra, because I've worked to incorporate the thinking and spiritual resonance of this and the unique flavor of this. Already I've worked on that, and then I can move on to another thing for another week, and over time then I can build a sense of what this whole piece is about, and so I can much more easily connect to each of those passages. It also, just in terms of the language that we're using, whilst we know that Hebrew is a very special language and it's a language which ideally prayers should be said in, nevertheless, if the Hebrew is going to become an impediment to our ability to connect, so then there would be opinions that suggest using English instead. What I might recommend is that use the Hebrew as a base, but then add in our own words in English. And I would say that particularly in the Amida, in the standing prayer in that amazing audience with God, use the Hebrew text as the scaffold, but then talk to God in our own language amongst that scaffold. So let's say there's a certain blessing within the Amida that really speaks to us. Like as an example, at the moment, Rafa'enu, heal us. So say the Hebrew words, but then before you actually hit Baruch of healing all of us, so then add in your own thinking about or requests to heal the world and to heal people who are unwell and or in distress, and do that in English, and that will also help tap into the feeling. Russell put in the chat, why is there a difference between the latest time for saying Shema, that according to the Magen Avraham it's at 8:20, and according to the Grot it's at 9:20. That's a more extended halachic discussion. We can give a separate show on that time about the different way that the Magen Avraham on the one hand and the Vilna Gaon on the other hand, who's also known as the Grot, how they calculated the Zmanim of the day. But you can rely on the Vilna Gaon, but if you want to be stringent and say Shema by 8:20, that's also by the Magen Avram's time. That's good too. Yeah.
I've got one small question. You think you might have touched on it, but in the Amida, we talk about refuah, healing the sick, and the additional piece is it. You hear what's sown. I don't know. I can't remember exactly, but it ends in Kol Yisrael. So it says within, the person you're praying for, and then as part of Israel,
Yep.
the people. But can you include non-Jewish? You talked about the world. Can you talk about those that are out there suffering, and even then the piece with Kol Yisrael, because they're kind of not part of Israel, but you see what I mean? It's kind of can you include non-Jewish people within that, because that's what we're praying for.
Yeah, you can pray for anyone. You can pray for everyone. Everyone is a child of Hashem. We are firstborn children, but everyone else are children too of Hashem. The reason that we put such and such a person, the Seif Shah Chadei Israel, amongst the other sick people of Israel is because, as you will remember from Maseches Brachos, from Tractate Brachot again, that there is a certain tension when it comes to singling out an individual by name, because even though we are using their name to pray for them, when we single them out, we're not just singling them out for the forces that try to bring mercy into the world, but we're also singling out their name, and then the forces of strict justice might also come to connect to that name, and that can be scary. So when we're protected by being a member of the Jewish people, we get the kind of the goodwill of the nation also behind us when we're being singled out as an individual. So then we have to stand on our own merits, and I wouldn't want to stand on my own merits because I've got because I'm a human being. So by saying B'so Shah Cholei Yisrael, we're trying to also, despite singling out that person, saying Hashem, look after that person. We're also saying, but back them up with the goodwill of the nation. So when it comes to praying for someone who is not a member of the Jewish nation, so then I would say that we can say pray for such and such who is a member of humanity.
Okay, and then just on to a different point to Paul, actually, so a contrasting point to Paul's observation, is that sometimes when davening, it's a little bit with mindfulness. Your mind will go elsewhere and then it will come back. So how does one deal with that in terms of knowing that you've actually completed your davening, even though you might have gone elsewhere and come back? Because that happens.
That always happens. I mean, yeah, that happens. I think you can reward yourself that you've been able to notice that it's gone, and that you've been able to bring your mind back, and not to be hard on yourself that has happened. And recognize that most of us have times when for me, I might be cycling, I might be putting kids in a well, I might be doing all sorts of things other than standing in front of Hashem. But there is one passage which is critical to get right, such that for everything else, I'd say okay, that happened. I'm glad that I noticed that it happened, and I'm just going to carry on from where I left off. There is one place in davening where we do need to be focused, and if we don't, we have to repeat. Some people say if even we shouldn't repeat nowadays, because even if we try and repeat it, our minds will still wander. But there is a tension on that one. That's the first blessing of the Amida, the very first blessing, which concludes Melech Ozer Mashiach Magen, Baruch Hashem Magen Avram. So that blessing, that very first blessing of the Amida, we are meant to minimally be aware of the meaning of each of the words of that blessing, in order to fulfill our obligation of prayer. For the rest of the Amida, we need to be aware that we just need to have awareness that we're standing in front of the King, even if we're not aware of the meaning of the words, or even if we're daydreaming, but we're daydreaming while standing in front of God. As long as we're aware that we're standing in front of the King, that's sufficient awareness to fulfill and discharge our obligation for prayer. But for the first blessing, we do need to understand.
That actually is quite interesting you made that point, because I've davened in some different locations around Jerusalem, and in some of them I'm almost at Modim, and people are just getting to the first bow on that first piece, and they must have been spending minutes and minutes and minutes just getting through that first piece.
Yeah. We in our Kodo, we spent, I think, a month learning the different parts of that first blessing. So
explains it. Yeah. Okay.
For another time. Yeah. Thank you everyone for logging in tonight.
Thank you.
May we all merit to use this time for Hashmi'eni es kolech, for Hashem to hear our voices, to hear us call out to Him, and may He hear our voice, and may this time speedily end.
Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hi, Alan. How are you getting on?
Yeah, fine, thanks, Jeff.
I haven't seen you for a while. You look about the same. You look as if you've got a bit of suntan there.
No, I think it's just the colouring. No, no suntan at all.
Are you getting out and about, or are you at home, or what's your?
No, I'm more or less at home most of the time. 99% of the time at home.
Right.
How are you?
Yeah. Okay.
Are you
Not too bad.
When you work at all?
Well, we're working at home, sort of thing. So trying to keep things going. Parents looking after them and that sort of thing. So, yeah. I can see Sassen's ceiling. Sassen.
I thought to myself, maybe he doesn't want to be seen. Maybe
No, he doesn't. I think he might have gone as well. No, because almost his head is just coming up.
Yes,
You've got to angle it, Sassen. You can't.
I can't see you. Can't see your head. Come up. Go up.
You got to angle the camera, Sassen. We can't see you like that.
We just see your forehead.
You have to come off mute as well.
He's on mute, yeah. So.
Anyway, his forehead is looking good. Right, I'm just about to go. Have a good evening, guys.
You too, Jeff. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, Sasson.